I'm Austine Esezobor, and this is SEO in 2024.
Austine, what's your number one SEO tip for 2024?
Get your entities into Google's knowledge vault, starting with your brand.
Okay, now let's start at the very beginning there. You said entities, so it's not just your brand. What are the entities that you're talking about?
So brand-related entities, think of the main brand and products, and brand-related such as personal branding, CEOs, CFOs, C-suite individuals, especially for B2B businesses that are in the B2B sector.
I love the fact that you also mentioned, I think people think about their own company's brand and possibly thought leaders within their organization as well, but they don't necessarily think of products as a brand. Is that something that SEOs miss out on?
I think so. So if you think of Apple, main brand, right? But then you have iPhone, you have iPad. These are their brand products, and they are products, but they fall within the brand grouping, if you like. So that would be essentially a brand in itself. And I think for e-commerce, in fact, all businesses, they will essentially need to have entities within Google's knowledge vault. Entities, think of entities as name, place, or things. As Google mentioned quite a while ago now, they're moving from strings to things. One of the reasons why they're doing this is because the traditional way that they seek information, their information retrieval system is really, I don't want to say out of date, but it kind of is out of date. When you compare it with, let's say, social media platforms, where when you want to have your entities or an entity on a social media platform, you have to input your entity, so you provide the information to them. This is where Google has slowly been headed over the years. They started with users. So they had users. Think of Androids, logged in users. Whenever you're on a mobile phone, you're logged into Google. Even when you're on desktop and you're logged out, Google prompts you to log into Google, right? This is them having data of users. I believe they're headed into the same sort of methodology with businesses, brands, websites. So this would be a key feature in 2024.
So what does the optimum entity footprint look like in 2024?
So ideally, you want to start with your brand. The brand is think of it as the root to everything on the website. Once you have the brand on there, then focus on brand related terms. The least important will be generic keywords. Brand, if you target brand, you'll be able to have your generic keywords or associate your branding with generic keywords in the long haul. In terms of what it looks like, having a knowledge panel, let's say for a main brand and one that you own, that the business owns, is a stamp of approval by Google that they not only know who you are, but know the audience that you're trying to target. The audience you're trying to target are Google's users. Remember, whenever we attract visitors via Google, we're essentially seeking to attain a subset of Google's users. So in order for Google to recommend us in the way that they will do in 2024 and beyond, we essentially need to ensure that we show to Google that we are providing them with the understanding that they need in order to recommend us as best as they can to their users. We must not think of SEO in terms of users that we acquire. We're acquiring Google's users. We're acquiring whichever search engine we're attracting users from. We're acquiring their users. So we essentially have to play by their game. Google is quickly moving on to ensuring that their users have all the information that they want and seek, and to some extent expect on Google. And this requires Google to have better understanding of entities.
And what's the ideal source of the information for the knowledge panel for Google? So, for instance, is it your website that ideally you'd like to position as the source of the data that Google are looking to actually create the knowledge panel from, or are other social websites or even wiki type websites a better source?
Ideally, you want it to be from your own website, a website that you own and have control of. Wikipedia, IMDb, and even Wikidata to some extent used to be ideal sources in the very early stages of Google focusing more on entities. Nowadays, I think the key for SEOs is to have a site, the sites that they work on, to provide Google with the same level of confidence that they have with Wikipedia, or even better yet, IMDb. This is why they tend to dominate with a number of things, search queries, because Google has this confidence in these big sites. Ideally, you want this sort of confidence with your own website, not a social media platform that you own. Ideally, your own website. It's your lands that you own and control. And having this as the source of information means whenever you update it, you can update the way Google shows you to your prospective audience.
And also talking about your brand, you say that with SGE, branded keywords are becoming increasingly important, more so important than generic keywords. So why is that?
So think of users beginning their search journey right until the end. SGE is designed to shorten that. It's designed to make their search journey a lot quicker. One of the ways that Google's aiming to do this is to provide the information on the SERPs themselves. And one of the ways they'll start with this is with generic keywords. So if someone were to search for home insurance, users almost don't expect to browse through different sites, find the information around home insurance which they want, go back onto Google, enter another site. All of that is it's a very lengthy, unnecessary process. So what Google's going to aim to do is to provide the information that they believe their audience are seeking within the SERPs themselves. And this will begin from generic keywords, which means the value from a business point of view will be around branded keywords. Think of the bottom of the funnel type of keywords. This is why I mentioned brand and products are essentially branded keywords as well. These sort of keywords will become increasingly more valuable to users because they'll be starting and ending their search journey a lot quicker. They'll be getting to those sort of queries, brand-led queries, quicker. And they'll be using more of those brand-led queries to pinpoint what they're seeking.
So essentially what you're trying to do then is teach users to use your brand plus maybe generic keywords at the same time for future searches, to educate Google about what your brand represents, but also to make it more likely that they're going to come back to you as well. And I guess it means that if you're producing content in other areas, podcasts, video shows, then you're trying to subtly incorporate your brand as part of that as well. So people search for your brand more in the future, or am I off track here?
No, that's it. That's it. Absolutely. These are the sort of things that people would expect when they carry out a search. They'll start from, let's say, an unknown point of view. And slowly, once they not slowly, quickly, they'll become a lot more informed, and their queries will be based around those that they trust. Those that they trust will be those that they see and have seen throughout their search journey. This is why if you target and focus on having your entities within Google's Knowledge Vault, you automatically are targeting your generic keywords. So there's no point in focusing on generic keywords. I think throughout the years, SEOs have focused more on having generic keywords as the richer source of traffic demand and generation or acquisition. These days, though, it's the brand that's going to be more important. The bottom of the funnel keywords will be a lot more value than the top end keywords. And by targeting those bottom of the funnel keywords and having those keywords entities within Google's Knowledge Vault, you ensure that you capture everything that's related to what your business does and who your business services. When I think of entities in line with the head term branded keywords. So as I mentioned earlier, iPhone, iPad, these are top end branded keywords, head term keywords, which will be the entities that we're trying to ensure that Google is aware of and has confidence in knowing. And we want Google to have the information from the website, in this case, from Apple's website, rather than a competitor.
I mean, what you're saying makes complete sense, but I was a little bit amazed with you saying there's no point in focusing on generic keywords, because I can understand the value, the increased value in obtaining a user through a branded search, and hopefully they're much more likely to convert. But for the upper part of the funnel, for a user that isn't aware that a brand exists, does generic keyword targeting not play an important part there?
It will be less of an important targeting. I think the whole point around those generic head terms, use, let's say, home insurance, as I mentioned earlier. SEOs has historically focused on just the generic term itself and aims to have that generic term within the left-hand panel and be recommended when that term is searched for. What I'm saying is, if you target, let's say, Barclays home insurance, that right there, by targeting it and having that branded ownership of that generic entity, you ensure that you're not only associating the brand with the generic term, but that whenever someone searches for that generic term, Google already knows that you're associated with that term, so they serve you up whether or not someone searches with the brand term.
Understood. Okay, so maybe even incorporate some of that into your other marketing activities.
Oh, absolutely.
So as part of as part of a podcast, say search Google for Barclays home insurance, and then you're getting some of that increased direction. You're giving some of that increased direction to Google as a result of that.
Yeah, absolutely. And users as well. We're already seeing it these days on above the line advertising, namely TV advertising. A lot of people now use the third, as I like to say, is call to action. The first call to action is the brand. The second one usually is is the brand's social media platform. The third call to action is now being seen very prominently, and that is the search for. That phrase specifically, search for, and then the term that the brand wants their users or prospect users to search for. This is a way of directing what people search for, and in a way ensuring that the search engines, Google, is aware that this search for this phrase is pertinent to this brand.
So what's your keyword research process? How do you establish the right keyword phrases that you should be targeting?
I would start with the brand. Start with the brand, ensure that you have a description concisely shown on the site of the entity home of the brand, and then product-led keywords, and have the description in a semantic triple. That, and then associating branded terms with the generic terms that you research. So if the business is in, I don't know, maritime, in the maritime industry, what are people searching for in the maritime industry? Even from a generic point of view, but associate your branding with that generic keyword research, whichever keyword that you choose. But ideally, ensure that your brand is prominent within the targeting of the generic keywords.
If an SEO is struggling for time, what should they stop doing right now so they can spend more time doing what you suggest in 2024?
Ideally, ineffective activities such as reporting on individual generic keywords, that's a time of the past. This is already a thing that's slowly evolving out. I would encourage SEOs to have the value focused on entities and their pages. So instead of reporting on generic keywords, focus on pages and entities. That is key. Remember, Google doesn't rank keywords, right? It ranks pages. Pages are what matters. That's the value that we have. If you want, you can have keywords as a secondary thing, but prominently, it should be the entities and the pages that we report on.
And what software do you use to track that? I would imagine if you're talking about pages, then Google Search Console would play an important part.
Yes. So Search Console, all the typical tools that we use. So Search Console, SEMrush, enterprise levels tools, Search Metrics, Bright Edge, PyData Metrics, all of the tools that we use, but have the view more on pages. And of course, GA. GA will be ideal. Have the view on pages, especially to ensure that business leaders move away from generic keywords and start looking into pages. This, by the way, will have extended marketing teams and departments better integrated with SEO and vice versa.
Austine Esezobor is an SEO consultant. You can find him over at democratizing.seo.com. Austine, thanks so much for being part of SEO in 2024.
Pleasure. Thank you, David.
I've been your host, David Bain. Get your copy of SEO in 2024, the book, over at SEOin2024.com.